Let's turn our attention now to the international newspapers to see how they are reporting on that speech from Donald Trump. Leo McGuinn is with us for that. Leo, what are the first articles saying about how it went down?
Well, the Washington Post call it a classic Trump speech, rich in showmanship and at odds with reality. America's momentum is back, Trump proclaimed, a big claim. This piece says, considering Trump is less than halfway through his first 100 days, what he's achieved so far is mostly turmoil and a blizzard of legal challenges. The Post also explained why a number of Democratic women wore pink in protest. Democrat Teresa Fernandez said that they wanted to wear the colour in order to raise the alarm about the negative impacts Trump's policies are having on women. And this New York Times opinion piece argues that it's hard not to protest a speech like that. The speech, they say, was overflowing with distortions, misinformations and outright lies from the president. And while the Republicans will claim that the Democratic protests were disrespectful, this piece says it's hard to blame those who couldn't stop themselves from shouting at the barrage of misinformation, particularly for those who remember what happened in that very same room back in 2021 when they were forced to cower from president supporters during the Capitol riots. The Wall Street Journal have a list of takeaways from the speech, including the fact that Trump continued to heap blame on Joe Biden, who he called the worst president in the US history. I'll finish with this cartoon in the UK in the Times this morning. Trump facing Congress, standing alongside Vladimir Putin, wearing, like his Vice President JD Vance, a Russian army medal.
Speaking of JD Vance, he has been accused of insulting British troops during an interview with Fox News. I imagine that's getting quite a lot of coverage in the UK.
It's gone down like a lead balloon across the UK dailies this morning, makes many of the front pages, mostly the tabloids, it has to be said. The Daily Mirror have called the comment a disgrace, referring to it as Trump's sidekick slur. Vance made the comments in an interview with Fox's Sean Hannity, saying a potential peacekeeping force in Ukraine will be 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 to 40 years. He since said that he wasn't referring to the UK or France, but that hasn't stopped the British press. The Express reporting that the Vice President has been branded a clown by a group of veterans who accuse him of disrespecting the 636 British troops who lost their lives fighting alongside the Americans in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Daily Star, known for their somewhat interesting front pages, call the Vice President JD Dunce, calling the remarks a vile slur. They also note that the comments have been condemned by several MPs, including Shadow Defence Secretary James Cartledge, who called it deeply disrespectful to ignore his country's service and sacrifice. I'll bring you some reaction from the American press. This is the Wall Street Journal. This opinion piece slams JD Vance. They say he's keen to defend his performance in the Oval Office, where he scolded Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, but offending two of America's most stalwart allies is an odd way to do it, even though the Vice President said it was absolutely dishonest to claim he was referring to France and Britain in his comments. Europeans have drawn a different conclusion, and after the last 2 weeks, it's easy to understand why.
Let's move away from the United States now to Syria, where the new regime is under pressure, Leo.
The Times have this piece this morning detailing how Syria's fragile alliances are starting to fail as Ahmed el-Shara faces a power struggle. The new Syrian leader's triumph depended on the tenuous alliances with the southern militias, but now they're accusing him of trying to monopolise power. El-Shara seeking to lift the sanctions imposed on Syria during the Assad regime as well. But while European and Arab countries have so far embraced him, this piece points out Syria's leader may find it difficult to cement his position unless he can make terms with those southern militias. The Washington Post also have this really interesting long read this morning, focusing on the countless bodies being excavated from the basements of people's homes, bodies of those who essentially crossed the Assad regime. In one district of Damascus, the bones in one basement were so incinerated that it was hard for workers to identify just how many bodies were actually lying in the ash. This article tells us that the challenge of identifying the dead will be enormous, with Syria ill-equipped to do so. The government has little capacity to exhume and catalogue bodies on such a large scale. It's estimated that about 100,000 people went missing in the regime's jails, but actually the number of dead is likely to be much higher than that.
Terrific. Well, we're going to turn to something lighter now to finish. And I'm getting the impression, Leo, you are a bit of a football fan. And there's an article about the Champions League you've picked up on.
Well, PSG taking on Liverpool in the Champions League round of 16 here in Paris tonight. And L'Équipe have this great front page this morning, a reference to one of the most famous albums of all time, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles. You can see several familiar faces on the front page this morning, whether it be current players such as Ousmane Dembele or Mo Salah, or club legends from both sides like Neymar or Robbie Fowler. The headline: The Battle. More Beatles references inside the paper this morning. They tell PSG, hey dudes, don't be afraid. They call the two sides the most informed sides in Europe and are actually pretty bullish about PSG's chances. But it's got to be remembered, Liverpool came top in the pool phase and they're actually 13 points ahead in the Premier League at the moment. So Paris need any help that they can get. They'll have to come together if they want to progress to the quarterfinals, because if they're not at their very best, they'll be saying hello, goodbye to the Champions League.
OK, Liam McGuinn, thanks a lot for that look at the international papers.